Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. My name is Cindy Miller, and I am your worship associate for today. The first thing is we apologize that the in-gathering video didn't play well, and we'll work to fix that. Whether you are a longtime member or if this is your first visit here, we welcome you as you are. Unitarian Universalism is a liberal religion with Jewish Christian roots. It has no creed, but rather it affirms the worth of human beings, advocates freedom of belief, and the search for truth and meaning. We welcome you to this virtual yet holy space. Please know that you are welcome here. This service today is led from the church's sanctuary by our worship leader, Victoria McDonald. Our beautiful music is by Jessica. Elizabeth brings us the time for all ages, and all of this is made possible by the technological skills of Josh. Our weekly announcements, there's quite a few. As you are able, please sign into the chat box likely on the right side of your screen, or if you're using a smartphone, it might be below the window. This lets us know who is joining us. Number 2, if you have joys, concerns, or sorrows that have affected your lives in the recent past that you would like to share with the congregation, please post them to the chat box on the right of your screen. If you are joining us for our live Sunday service for the first or second time and would like to get an email newsletter, please call the church administration office and leave a message that includes your email address. If you would like to talk to someone about the church, please contact the office, and we are very glad you're joining us. Number 4, Reverend Kevin is giving a 3-session class about UU history. All sessions are held on Zoom. The first one was just this past Friday, but 2 more are held, one on March 12th and one on March 28th. See your UU weekly updates for more information. Number 5, our neighbors in Pocatello, the Pocatello UU Fellowship, is hosting an online auction to help them raise funds for a $5,000 challenge grant they have received from the UU funding program. Bidding is currently open. Your last day to bid for goods and services is March 6th. You can find full information in the UUCIF weekly update email that comes on Wednesday. Your care team reminds you that they are there for you. If you need a ride to a doctor's appointment, you or your family suffering from the flu or other malady and would appreciate a meal that you don't have to cook, would you appreciate a friendly social call so you don't feel so alone? The UUCIF care team is here to help. If you need a hand or know a member or friend who does, please contact the care team. Contact information is in the UUCIF weekly update, emailed on each Wednesday. And our last announcement, in the time of COVID and of virtual meetings, we remind you that the church is entirely self-supported by us, its members and friends. You can make your contribution by mailing a check to the church at Post Office Box 50376 in Idaho Falls, 83405, or by clicking on the Donate button in the upper right corner of the church's website. For February's Change for Change donations will go to the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Center in Idaho Falls. Please write Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault in the PayPal box or in the memo line of a donation check. As we come together for our worship, please contemplate this quote from Emma Merchant. We all have many different reasons for being here, but I like to think that we all have one common reason for being here: love. Over everything else, we are here because we are the people who choose to love. We do not have a bloodline, but we each have a deep, unconditional love that runs through us all, and we choose that love. We choose each other, and our hearts echo, I choose you. I am here, I am here, I am here. I will ring the peace bowl 3 times. And as I do so, please breathe deeply. For as long as you hear its sound, I invite you to slowly breathe in and out as you think about choosing love. The peace you will feel will bring you into our sacred shared gathering, no matter where you are physically located. Please enjoy our prelude. Our church covenant was decided upon by our members along with 7 Unitarian Universalist principles is our guide to how we relate to the world and to each other. Even though we cannot be together physically and cannot recite this as one, feel free to read along with me from your order of service as I read our covenant here. Love is the spirit of this community and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now Victoria will light our chalice as I read these words. Perhaps what made her beautiful was not her appearance or what she achieved, but in her love and in her courage and in her audacity to believe that no matter what shadows were around her, light ran wild within her. And that was the way she came alive, and it showed in everything.
The call to worship is taken from our hymnal, words by Denise Levertov. Intricate and untraceable, weaving and interweaving, dark strand with light, designed beyond all spiderly contrivance, to link, not to entrap. Elation, grief, joy, contrition entwined, shaking, changing, forever forming, transforming. All praise to the great web. There should be, after I do that, there should be hymn 151, Jessica.
I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains holding me. I wish I could say
we'll have time for all ages with Elizabeth Cogliotti.
I'm Elizabeth Coyote, Director of Lifespan Faith Development here at Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. And our time for all ages today is on Florida Ruffin Ridley. She was born on January 29, 1861, and educated in Boston, Massachusetts. Her mother, Josephine, was an abolitionist, an anti-lynching crusader, club leader, editor, feminist, orator, and suffragist. Her father, George, was the first African American to graduate from Harvard Law School in 1869. He later became one of the first African American judges. Florida was the second African American teacher in the Boston public schools, teaching at the Grant School from 1880 to 1888. Florida and her husband moved to Brookline, Massachusetts, where they raised their 2 children and became members at Second Unitarian Church. She later served as the editor of the first newspaper in the country owned, managed, and published by African American women, called the Women's Era. It was the official journal of the Colored Women's League, later known as the National Association of Colored Women. In 1920, Florida and her mother helped found the League of Women for Community Service. They also raised funds and purchased a mansion that provided housing for female workers from the South and college students. Florida and her mother were very involved in the African American Women's Club movement dedicated to empowering African Americans. Florida Ridley also had a number of fiction and nonfiction stories and articles published. Florida died on February 25, 1943. The end.
For years, the sharing of joys, concerns, and sorrows has been our enduring ritual. It is a time in our congregation when each of us has an opportunity to share major events in our lives so we can all be uplifted by this Unitarian Universalist community. As I read the joys and sorrows, Victoria will light the candles. We're going to start with the ones that were emailed, and then Josh will read any if they came in the chat box. Okay, so Victoria has a joy and a concern. Her joy is for all of those who have been vaccinated across the country, and her concern is for those who have not yet been able to make an appointment to be vaccinated. From Nancy Frank, a joy. She is thrilled to read about the new LGBTQ resource house coming to Idaho Falls. She says it sounds like the project is well funded and will have a significant positive effect on the lives of young people. Do we have any others?
Yeah. Joy from Judy Stanley. Thanks to all who helped her have a wonderful day yesterday. It was good to see you all around, and she hopes to see you again soon. And that's it.
That's it, okay. We light an additional candle for all those joys, concerns, and sorrows we hold in our hearts and are unable to share today. Stay healthy and strong, members and friends. Our UU community lifts up its love for you, for each and every one of you.
The reading comes from Frederick Douglass. It's also found in our hymnal. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out what people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. And now we have another song by Jessica, Come Sunday. It's found in the hymnal, and she will just play the music. Growing up in Idaho Falls, I had no contact with African Americans, and I was oblivious to their continuous oppression, except when I watched the evening news or read Time magazine that described and showed one or two pictures about race riots. It seemed very far away. The fear of minorities demanding their rights was and remains frightening to many. Trying to be aware of others' lives, I have pondered racism and the centuries-long oppression minorities have suffered. Watching PBS with its shows on African American history and our nation's prejudice towards minorities has saddened and ashamed me. One of the antidotes to my ignorance has been to read about those who have been sidelined from mainstream history. One of those was a woman who steadfastly stood up to white supremacy. Ida B. Wells, born in 1862 to slave parents, making her a slave. And I will show you, I found this little dandy autobiography in thrift books, Crusade for Justice, which was written by Ida B. Wells herself, and it's quite a story. She is very unassuming. Ida's legacy is one of the reasons African Americans have refused to accept inferior status. As I read her autobiography, I decry that present-day America is still enveloped in racism. Holly Springs in northern Mississippi was Ida's birthplace. Excuse me. Her mother was a religious woman who taught Ida that her essential dignity was not affected by slavery. Ida's father attained his freedom after emancipation and became a community leader in Holly Springs. Since he was a skilled carpenter and an all-around tradesman, he built and owned the family home, also building others' homes and industrial buildings after the Civil War. The family was very well respected in the community. However, her father and mother, with 7 other children, expected Ida to help raise her siblings, which she did willingly. However, in 1878, when she was 16, yellow fever came to Holly Springs. Now, I Googled yellow fever because I have memories of the Panama Canal, which was the building was traumatized by yellow fever. Apparently 22,000 workers died from yellow fever until a Texan, Gompers, I think was his name, something like that, figured out how to suppress the mosquito. And of course, any disease, when they don't understand it, makes it far worse. Thanks to science, we know that yellow fever is caused by the mosquito bite of Aedes aegypti mosquito, resulting in a high fever along with cell death in the liver and kidneys. Contracting yellow fever often led to a very quick death. Of the 3,500 residents of Holly Springs, 2,000 fled, and those remaining, who were oftentimes black families, were in great danger. They had stayed behind to take care of their family. 304 residents died, including both of Ida's parents and their 10-month-old son. Family and friends offered to care for the younger children, but Ida was determined to hold her family together. Her father had left them some money, they had a home, and with the help of the Masons, Ida became their sole caregiver. She decided to teach so she could maintain their home, and after passing an exam, she taught in a one-room schoolhouse 6 miles from home. In a few years, her teenage brothers apprenticed to be carpenters. 2 other siblings had died, but Ida remained responsible for her 3 sisters. But when she was 20, her aunt Fanny Butler, who lived in Memphis, Tennessee, which was 56 miles north of her home, she urged Ida and the girls to move in with her. Ida then taught in nearby rural schools until she passed her teacher's exam for the city schools of Memphis. In May of 1884, Ida was traveling by train to her school in Woodstock, Tennessee. Although she had a first-class ticket, the conductor told her she was only allowed to ride in the smoking car. Ida refused to move. So the conductor and the baggage man dragged her out of first class into the smoking compartment, and she exited the train at the next stop. She returned to Memphis and sued the railway. She won a settlement of $500, which was a lot, but that settlement was later rescinded, and she had to return the money. But she sued a white rail company, she gained a settlement, and repaid that money. Shows her determination and grit, while still a 22-year-old woman. By the fall of 1884, she passed the exam for teaching in the Memphis City Schools, where she worked for 7 years. Ida was regarded as a competent, caring teacher for her African-American pupils. But in her personal life, Ida was very serious, not engaging in the frivolities of other young women. Regarded as beautiful, she had many suitors, yet none met her standards. However, Ida yearned to become more involved in the struggle for black equality. When she began writing for a church newspaper, she described in detail her suit against the railroad. As Ida's articles spread, she gained recognition and became bolder in her writing. But in 1891, she was dismissed from her school teaching job after describing the inferior conditions in black schools. But in the meantime, she'd become part owner of a small Memphis press and devoted her attention to news of the black community. Where am I? After witnessing the lynching of 3 young black businessmen in Memphis, she turned her writing and her fury on the lynchers and the white community who condoned the lynching. Soon after, an angry mob retaliated, wrecked her press, and threatened to lynch her. Fortunately, Ida had traveled to Philadelphia to cover a convention and was warned not to return. She left Memphis, where her sisters remained, as she continued to describe the lynching incidents in the New York Age newspaper. I've got some water here. In describing why she became so impassioned about lynching, Ida said, and I quote, The more I studied the situation, the more I was convinced that the Southerner had never gotten over his resentment, that the Negro was no longer his plaything, his servant, and his source of income. Hence came the practice of lynching to stifle Negro manhood, which defended itself in the burning alive of Negroes who were weak enough to accept favors from white women. Later, it became very obvious that accusation of black men's intimate relations with white women were often lies. The New York Age printed 10,000 copies of her writing and made them available throughout the country. Frederick Douglass, the famous black orator and social reformer, told Ida what a revelation her article had been. In 1893, Ida focused on the fact that African Americans had not been allowed to participate in Chicago's World Columbian Exposition, despite many black petitioners requesting to be included. Haiti was allowed to have an information booth, and they requested that Frederick Douglass represent their nation. Douglass spoke movingly about racial injustice, and throughout that week-long fair, he was surrounded by white fairgoers who told him how much they appreciated his honesty. Ida added to his message, writing a small book to hand out at the fair, where she reminded readers that some of the earliest settlers were enslaved peoples and have greatly contributed to the wealth of our nation. In her book titled A Red Record, Tabulated Statistics and Alleged Causes of Lynchings in the U.S., she wrote, quote, "The student of American sociology will find this year marked by a pronounced awakening of the public conscience to a system of anarchy and outlawry, which had grown during a series of 10 years to be so common that scenes of unusual brutality failed to have any visible effect upon the humane sentiments of the people in our land," unquote. Ida observed during the fair how Douglass's words affected listeners, and she was encouraged to speak to groups. She was invited to New York City and Brooklyn's women's clubs. During her first lecture, she broke down and wept as she described the lynchings she had personally witnessed. Audiences saw her tears and were moved by her sincerity. In that New York City audience sat a British woman, Miss Impey. I never saw her first name. Miss Impey returned to England to contact women's groups about this remarkable young black woman. In 1894, at Miss Impey's invitation, Ida was invited to speak in England, Scotland, and Wales about lynching in the United States. She toured for 6 months, and as audiences heard her horrifying words, Ida realized that British women's civic groups used their collective power to influence male lawmakers. During her presentations, despite her intention to remain unemotional, she was obviously distressed by what she had witnessed. Often, groups up to 1,000 came to hear her speak. Her listeners were deeply affected and promised to help. When asked why the United States allowed lynching, her answer was that it gave the mobs the encouragement to hang or incinerate blacks without trial. She returned to America, urging African American women to become active in their communities. Her ideas of organized civic groups led to the Women's Era Club in Boston and similar clubs in New England and Chicago. Chicago even named their group the Ida B. Wells Club. She continued to organize and later was one of the early promoters of the NAACP. The Chicago Inter-Ocean was the only U.S. paper that persistently denounced racism, and Ida, under the name Iola, continued to write passionately about injustice. Her honest descriptions of lynchings that women and children attended, in addition to men, made some realize how brutal those practices were. Ida made a second journey a few years later to England, and while she traveled, the Chicago Inter-Ocean published her articles, inspiring important Brits to form anti-lynching communities that influenced American civic groups. Ida returned to Chicago and continued to write and lecture, but her settling in Chicago was not purely activism. She was interested in Ferdinand Lee Barnett, founder of the Conservator, the first black newspaper in Chicago. Mr. Barnett was a law school graduate, a courageous publisher, but also a widower raising 2 young boys. Ida and Ferdinand courted, married, and added 4 more children to the family. Because of her now busy domestic life, Ida devoted herself to being a mother until their youngest was 8 years old. As a mother, she self-reported that she was strict and insisted on good conduct in her children. In Chicago, the Barnetts were deeply involved in civic affairs. However, Ida never forgot that her life was in danger, and she kept a pistol in the house that was never used. Also aware of the constant threats to the lives of black men, she urged young men at Grace Presbyterian Church to form a self-defense organization. And in 1910, Ida established the Negro Fellowship League, hoping for support from middle and upper-class Negroes with education and influence. But their lack of interest was discouraging. They did not intend to leave their comfortable lives to enter the poorer sections of town to help migrants arriving from the South. Ida continued her opposition with her voice and her writing against injustice and discrimination in Chicago. When race riots occurred, she appealed to organized groups such as the Equal Rights League, the African American Council, and the press for support. She called mass meetings in churches, at the headquarters of the Negro Fellowship League, or any available space. With funds given by personal friends or local newspaper ads, she traveled to the riot scenes, investigated carefully, and reported the facts. Unfortunately, those reports were destroyed in a house fire, which is a great loss for history. In 1927, when Ida was 65, she realized she must record the facts concerning her anti-lynching activities and the troubled times she lived through. She first wrote her notes by hand, then hired a secretary to take dictation. The final unfinished chapter is illuminating as it describes her reaction to memories of injustice and why she had to do something. Ida B. Wells was a well-known crusader from 1890 to 1931 and was well-known throughout the entire country. She was described as, quote, militant, courageous, determined, impassioned, and aggressive. Those are very strong terms for a woman born into slavery. The term militant did not refer to the militancy we know today, especially after January 6th, but it typifies her not allowing others to treat her as inferior. As a 22-year-old, she had stood up to 2 threatening men in a railroad car. On March 21st, 1931, Ida came home from shopping, complaining of not feeling well, and went to bed. The following day, she became unconscious and was taken to the hospital where doctors consulted how best to save her life. But uremic poisoning had not been properly diagnosed, and she died 4 days later, March 25th, age 69. There wasn't much information in Ida's autobiography about her specific religious activities, although she helped group meetings inside many churches. When visiting Great Britain, she was questioned about how Christian churches permitted lynching, and Ida responded that, quote, everybody in authority, from the President of the United States on down, had declared their inability to do anything, and that Christian bodies and moral associations do not touch the question. It is the easiest way to get along in the South, unquote. So to bring in our Unitarian faith, the 7 UU principles are relevant to Ida B. Wells' work. The first, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Second, justice, equity, and compassion in human relation. And the sixth, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Those specific principles contain universal themes for human beings. Ida B. Wells has been mentioned on PBS and discussed on NPR on February 1st. When Kamala Harris spoke how she stood on the shoulders of those before her, Ida B. Wells was one of the women Harris was referring to. And I have a few words to say about the songs. I chose the Nina Simone song, I Wish I Knew How to Be Free. I saw a fabulous PBS program showing some wonderful black women singing that song. And it's just a remarkable song. And This Little Light of Mine, 118, which we'll sing right after I'm done, I saw also on PBS. And it showed a group of black vote during the civil rights era. A group of people were going out to register voters, and they showed a bus full of these vote getters, vote registers, and Fannie Lou Hamer, another rather person lost in the mists of history, got on that bus, and she looked around at the frightened people, and she realized they needed to sing. And she got them singing This Little Light of Mine, which is what Josh will play next. So now we're going to sing 118, This Little Light of Mine.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Building up the world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up the world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up the world, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Our closing words also come from our hymnal. They are words written by Martin Luther King Jr. We're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that. We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds, which precipitate and perpetuate war. One day we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. We shall hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope.
And now Victoria will extinguish the chalice as we speak the following words together if we can. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please remember to join our social hour starting in just a few minutes. The link to join is in your order of service. And in the meantime, please enjoy our postlude.